So what if I found him a replacement? Is that really a crime now? Maybe if my husband had acted like a man, I would not have needed another one waiting for me at the airport. People love to call women cruel when they finally stop begging to be loved properly. But no one asks what kind of husband sits beside you for 6 years and still makes you feel single. So yes, I texted him from my business trip and told him he had 48 hours to leave our apartment before I came home with someone better. He only answered with one word. Understood. I smiled when I read it, because to me that was not a warning. That was him finally knowing he had been replaced. My name is Sloane Mercer. I was 34, and I worked as a senior partnerships manager for a luxury hospitality group, which meant I knew exactly what it looked like when someone valued what was in front of them. My quiet husband, Caleb, had 6 years to make me feel wanted. 6 years, one ring, one apartment, one life that looked stable from the outside and felt empty from the inside. So yes, when I found a man who looked at me like I still had a pulse, I did not feel guilty. I felt relieved. And when I texted Caleb from my business trip and told him he would have 48 hours to leave before I came home with someone better, I thought I was finally being honest. He answered in that calm way of his with one plain word, and I laughed at the screen because I thought calm meant defeat. Of course Caleb was calm. Caleb was always calm. He was calm when the sink flooded. Calm when my father made jokes about him being too soft. Calm when I came home late from dinners and told him not to start acting like a jealous teenager. That calmness used to feel safe back when we were younger, and I was tired of men who filled rooms with noise. In our first apartment, the ceiling leaked for 3 nights during a storm, and Caleb stayed awake with a bucket, towels, and a screwdriver he probably did not need but held like it gave him purpose. I fell asleep on the couch to the sound of rain in a pan. In the morning there was coffee on the table and one dry corner of the room because he had moved every piece of furniture by himself while I slept. I loved him then. I really did. Not because he was exciting, because he made the world less heavy. The problem was that he never learned the difference between making life easier and making a woman feel chosen. He could fix a ceiling, remember the insurance renewal, and fold a fitted sheet like it had personally offended him. But he could not look across a restaurant table and make me feel like I was the only woman there. To be fair, I tried to explain it at first. I told him I needed more from him. He asked what more meant, soft and serious, as if love was a checklist he could complete if I gave him the right boxes. I told him that was exactly the problem. He heard criticism. I heard proof. We had that kind of marriage, the kind where every conversation landed in the wrong room. Before my Denver trip, he drove me to the airport in the grey morning light, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the console like he was waiting for instructions. My red suitcase stood between us in the trunk. Caleb had bought it for my first major work trip because he said I would spot it faster at baggage claim. At the time, I thought it was sweet. Practical, but sweet. Now it just felt like him. Useful. Predictable. Boring enough to make me angry. At the drop-off lane, he lifted it out, pulled the handle up, and folded my coat neatly over the top before handing it to me. That was Caleb. Always folding, always smoothing, always making small things neat while the big things rotted. He asked if something had changed between us. Not in a dramatic way. No scene, no raised voice. Just that soft curiosity, like he was asking why the Wi-Fi had stopped working. I told him I was tired and that not everything was about him. He nodded, folded the baggage tag flat against the handle, and said he only wanted to understand. Of course he did. Caleb always wanted to understand after the part where he was supposed to feel. I left him standing by the curb and walked into the airport without turning around. 2 hours later, I was in the lounge, answering work emails, watching men in expensive shoes move through the glass doors like they owned time itself. That was when Dante Ruiz noticed my suitcase first, then me. He said the color made it impossible to miss me. I smiled because Caleb had said almost the same thing years ago, but Dante made it sound less like safety and more like desire. Dante was 38, regional director for a resort group we had been trying to partner with for months, and he had the kind of confidence my father respected without needing to understand why. He remembered my drink after one conversation. He laughed with his whole chest. He leaned in when I spoke, not because he was hard of hearing, but because he wanted me to know I had his attention. By the time we reached Denver, I had already decided Caleb would not ruin this trip with his quiet little sadness. I had a conference to win, a man who saw me, and 3 days to prove I was still the kind of woman someone could choose loudly. That night, when Caleb texted to ask if I had landed safely, I looked at Dante across the hotel bar, let the message sit unanswered, and ordered another drink. By the second night in Denver, I had built a whole new version of myself around the way Dante looked at me. To be fair, I did not plan to cross every line at once. I planned to enjoy the attention, finish the meetings, bring home a better contract, and maybe let Caleb feel the distance he had created. That was how I said it to myself, because it sounded cleaner than the truth. Dante made it easy. He did not ask why my husband was not with me. He asked why a woman like me still sounded lonely when she talked about home. He said Caleb seemed like the kind of man who kept a house running, but forgot there was a woman inside it. I laughed too fast because that sentence landed exactly where I was already bruised. 3 drinks, 2 late dinners. One hand on my lower back as we walked through the hotel lobby, and suddenly I was not thinking about vows. I was thinking about proof. Proof that I was not fading. Proof that my quiet husband had not turned me into another piece of furniture in our apartment. Mara helped, of course. Mara always knew how to make bad ideas sound like self-respect. I sent her a picture of Dante's hand beside my glass, not touching me, just close enough to say what I wanted it to say. She sent back that I looked alive for the first time in years. She said Caleb had been given enough chances to wake up. She said men like him only understood loss after they were replaced. I kept rereading that word. Replaced. It felt sharp, but it also felt fair. That same night, Caleb called while Dante was still sitting across from me at the hotel bar. I almost ignored it, but Dante watched the screen and asked if I was going to let my husband keep interrupting my life. So I answered. Caleb did not yell. He did not ask if I was with someone. He asked about the company mixer from 2 weeks earlier when I introduced him as the man who kept my plants alive instead of saying he was my husband. That was so Caleb, reaching backward for one little sentence while the whole marriage was already moving past him. He said it had stayed with him. He said people laughed and I never corrected it. I told him he was making a joke into a wound because he needed something to hold against me. That was not fully true, but it was useful. He went quiet. I could hear the apartment behind him, the old refrigerator hum, the faint click of him folding something on the table. Always folding, always straightening, always turning pain into neat edges. He asked if I still wanted to be married to him. I told him I wanted to be married to a man who made me feel wanted, and if that sounded cruel, maybe he should ask himself why the sentence fit him so badly. He did not answer right away. Dante looked at me like I had just done something brave. That mattered more to me than Caleb's silence. The next morning, Caleb sent me a message asking me to confirm what I wanted done with the apartment and the contents if I had already made my decision. The contents. I actually rolled my eyes when I read it. Only Caleb could turn a marriage ending into an inventory question. I sent the screenshot to Mara, and she said he was already acting like a man packing himself away. I believed that because I wanted to. The day moved fast after that. Meetings, coffee, a presentation, Dante's shoulder brushing mine at the conference table, his voice lowering when he said he did not want to be some secret I ran back home from. He said if I was serious, he could change his flight. He could come back with me. He could stand beside me so Caleb understood this was not a phase. I should have heard the pressure in that. Instead, I heard courage. By evening, I was back in my hotel room with my red suitcase open on the bed and the city lights pressed against the window. I packed the dress Dante liked. I left Caleb's message unanswered for 26 minutes, long enough to feel in control. Then I wrote back that he had 48 hours to leave before I came home. I told him I would not be alone. I told him I wanted no scene, no begging, no embarrassing display in the hallway. I told him Dante was coming with me and that our apartment needed to be clear before Sunday. My thumb hovered once before I sent it, not because I felt guilty, because I wanted the words to land exactly right. Caleb answered with one plain word: understood. I read it twice, smiled, and placed the phone face down beside my hotel keycard. To me, that was not a warning. That was my quiet husband finally asking permission to disappear. The next day, I stopped pretending the trip was only about work. To be fair, the conference still mattered. I still wore the right blazer, smiled at the right clients, and spoke about partnership growth like my personal life was not sitting open on my phone. But under every meeting, there was a second plan forming. I was going to come home with Dante beside me, not hidden, not explained away, beside me. I wanted Caleb to see the difference between a man who made a woman feel chosen and a man who only knew how to keep the Wi-Fi paid. Mara loved the idea at first. She said it sounded cinematic. She said Caleb had spent years acting like a background character, so maybe he should not be shocked when someone else took the main role. That made me laugh, and I needed that laugh because Caleb had still not sent anything dramatic. No begging, no angry paragraph, no desperate call. Just that one flat answer and then silence. 6 hours, 9 hours, 14 hours. Nothing. My quiet husband was giving me exactly what I had always accused him of giving me, and somehow it irritated me more than a fight would have. By evening, Dante was in my hotel room with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, standing near the window like he belonged in whatever life I was building next. Mara was on FaceTime, propped against the lamp. 2 women from the conference were there too, half drunk from the networking dinner, curious in the way people get when someone else's marriage starts sounding like entertainment. I told myself I was being clear. I told myself Caleb deserved honesty. Really, I wanted witnesses. I wanted people to hear me say it so I could not soften it later. When I called him, he answered on the 3rd ring. The apartment was behind him, clean and warm, with the yellow floor lamp on near the couch. There were boxes stacked by the wall. I smiled when I saw them. Of course he had started packing. Of course he would turn heartbreak into cardboard, tape, and neat little piles. He was wearing the old navy sweatshirt I hated because it made him look like he had given up on being seen. He asked if I was alone. Soft, calm, almost polite. I told him no, and I made sure my voice did not bend. Dante stepped closer, close enough for Caleb to see part of him on the screen. Mara covered her mouth, laughing without sound. I said I wanted this to be simple. I said he had heard me clearly. I said I was coming home Sunday, and the apartment needed to be empty before I arrived. Caleb looked at Dante for 1 second, then back at me. He asked if I was bringing that man into our apartment. I said yes. He asked if I wanted him to leave before then. I said yes. He asked if that was what I wanted him to write down. That almost made me laugh. There he was, being Caleb in the middle of his own replacement, reaching for details like a man filling out a maintenance form. I told him he could write it in his little notebook if it helped him feel useful. One of the women behind me made a small sound, not quite a laugh. Dante smiled, but it was thinner than before. Caleb did not react to either of them. He only lowered his eyes and wrote something on the pad beside him. Then he folded a stack of towels on the coffee table and placed them into one of the boxes. Slow, flat. Careful. I read it as obedience. I read it as proof that I had finally said the thing strong enough to move him. The call should have ended there, but I pushed because the room was watching and because being watched made me braver than I really was. I told him he had always been better at leaving quietly than living loudly. I told him I did not want an embarrassing scene in the hallway. I told him Dante did not need to see him trying to become a man at the last minute. Caleb stopped folding for a second. He picked up the framed photo from our first apartment, the one from the night after the ceiling leak, when I was wrapped in a blanket, and he looked exhausted, but proud. He held it longer than he needed to. For one strange second, the room behind me got too quiet. I saw the younger version of us in that frame. I saw coffee on a table, rain in a pan, his hands raw from fixing something I barely thanked him for. Then I closed that door in my head. A memory was not a marriage. A towel was not passion. A man could be useful and still not be enough. Caleb set the photo face down inside the box and said he would handle the move properly. Properly. That word again. I repeated it after the call ended, making my voice low and dull like his, and Mara laughed, but not as hard as before. Dante kissed my temple, yet his hand left my shoulder quickly. I did not care. My red suitcase was open on the bed, packed with the dress he liked, and by then I had already decided how Sunday would look. Caleb would be gone. Dante would walk in. And for once, the apartment would belong to the person who knew how to live in it. Sunday was still 2 days away, but after that video call, the trip stopped feeling like a secret and started feeling like a public decision. To be fair, that was what I wanted. I wanted the world to move ahead with me before Caleb could pull me back into another quiet conversation at our kitchen table. Another sad look, another folded towel placed beside a problem he would never actually name. The next part of my plan was simple. I would tell the people who mattered before they heard it from someone else, and I would make it sound brave, not messy. First came my father. Graham Mercer respected strength, or at least the kind of strength that looked good in a suit and spoke loudly in restaurants. He had never disliked Caleb exactly. He just never understood him. He called him steady, which in my family was what people said when they meant forgettable. So when I called my father from the hotel lobby and told him Caleb was moving out, I expected silence, then maybe approval. I said I had finally chosen a man who matched me. I said Dante was coming back with me because I was done apologizing for wanting more. My father did not ask if I was happy. He asked whose name was on the apartment lease. That annoyed me so much I almost laughed. I told him it was our apartment, and he asked again, slower, whose name was on the lease. I said Caleb handled those things because Caleb enjoyed boring paperwork. Then he asked who paid the utilities, who dealt with the building manager, who renewed the insurance, who arranged repairs when the bathroom wall leaked last winter. 1 question, 2 questions, 5 questions. I hated how many answers had Caleb's name in them. For 1 second, the hotel lobby seemed too bright. The marble floor, the brass lamps, Dante's reflection in the glass doors behind me. I almost saw the shape of it, not the whole thing, just a thin outline. My quiet husband had not only lived inside our life, he had been holding up the walls while I called him small for doing it. I closed that thought before it could grow. Paperwork was not love. Bills were not passion. A man could keep records and still fail his wife. I told my father he was missing the point, and he said I had better make sure I was not confusing attention with shelter. I ended the call because I did not call him to be examined. After that, I called Tessa, my younger sister. Tessa was softer than me in public, but sharper in private. She listened while I explained that Caleb had made me lonely for years, that Dante made me feel alive, that sometimes a woman had to choose herself before a marriage finished swallowing her. Tessa did not defend Caleb right away, which almost made me trust her. She said Caleb was emotionally hard to reach. She said she had seen me shrink beside him at dinners while he answered practical questions and missed every emotional one. That part was true, and I held it like a weapon. Then she asked why I needed an audience to leave him. I told her she was making me the villain because it was easier than admitting Caleb had failed me. She said nothing for a moment. I heard her breathing, then the small clink of a spoon against a mug. She said there was a difference between leaving a marriage and staging a replacement. I told her she sounded jealous that I still had options. The call ended cold. Not loud. Cold. Mara's messages had changed too. At first, she had sent voice notes laughing, telling me I was finally taking my life back. Now her replies came slower, shorter. She said I should be careful. She said Dante seemed intense. She said maybe I should let Caleb leave without turning it into a scene. Of course, Mara would get nervous once the story became real. Some people love the spark and hate the smoke. I stopped sending her every detail. I did not need weak energy around me. That afternoon, I texted Mrs. Alvarez, the building manager, because I wanted to make sure Caleb did not create some pathetic hallway drama when he left. Mrs. Alvarez was polite as always, but her answer irritated me. She said Caleb had already spoken to her about approved removal times and storage access. She called him the leaseholder, like that word meant more than 6 years of marriage. I stared at the message for a while, then told myself she was just an old woman who respected forms more than feelings. Still, the word stayed with me. Leaseholder. It sounded too official for a man I had just dismissed on a hotel screen. Later that evening, Caleb sent one more practical message. He asked whether I wanted the old sailing gear from my father's boat packed with my belongings or left in storage. That made me roll my eyes so hard Dante noticed. Caleb had maintained that boat more than I ever had. He checked the lines, cleaned the cover, kept a small box of batteries and tools near the dock because he said boats punished neglect. I used to call it his little loser toolbox. Now, even in the middle of being replaced, he was worried about straps, labels, covers, and folded canvas. I told Dante Caleb was sorting junk because that was easier than having a spine. Dante smiled, but he asked again if Caleb was always this calm. I said yes, and that was the whole problem. Then I told him to change his flight to mine. Sunday. Same landing time. Same taxi. Same door. Caleb could keep his boxes, his labels, and his careful little hands. I was coming home with the man who knew how to walk into a room like he owned it. By Saturday morning, I had stopped asking anyone whether I was doing the right thing because the people around me had started answering too carefully. To be fair, careful answers were exactly what had made my marriage feel dead. Caleb was careful. Caleb measured words like they were screws from his little toolbox. Caleb could spend 10 minutes choosing the right size storage bin and 6 years avoiding one honest sentence about whether he still wanted me. I needed noise now. I needed proof. So I made the next part of my plan public enough that I could not crawl back from it. I took a photo in the hotel elevator, not of Dante's face, not fully, just his hand wrapped around the handle of my red suitcase, while my reflection stood beside him in the mirrored wall. The caption was simple. Sometimes life gives you 48 hours to choose yourself. I posted it before breakfast. 10 minutes later, Mara saw it and did not react. No fire emoji. No voice note. No little scream of support. Nothing. I told myself she was busy. Of course she was busy. People always got busy when a woman stopped talking and started moving. Dante liked the post first. Then 2 conference women liked it. Then one mutual friend from home viewed it and did not like it, which annoyed me more than any insult would have. Caleb did not respond at all. 16 minutes. 32 minutes, 1 hour, nothing from my quiet husband. I hated that he could still make silence feel like a room I had to stand inside. I carried that irritation through the last meetings, through coffee with Dante, through the way he kept asking small questions about Sunday. He asked if Caleb had somewhere to go. I said Caleb had spent years acting like he needed nothing, so he could finally prove it. Dante asked if our apartment was really mine to invite him into. I laughed because the question sounded like something my father would ask. I said it was my home, and that should have been enough. After lunch, Caleb finally messaged. Not angry, not broken, clean. He said if I wanted the marriage to end, he would not trap me inside it. He said I could come home alone and we could separate with dignity. He said he would not compete with a man I had already invited into our home. That was the closest he came to bleeding, and even that came folded into neat little sentences. I read the message while Dante watched me over the rim of his coffee cup. For a second, I almost hated Caleb for making the offer sound decent. Then I remembered the nights I sat beside him on our couch while he answered work emails and called it quality time. I remembered dinners where he listened, nodded, and still made me feel like I was talking through glass. I remembered my birthday when he bought me a beautiful watch and spent half the evening explaining the warranty because he could not just say he wanted me to have something beautiful. So I answered him with the truest thing I had left. I told him he made me lonely inside a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. I told him he had no right to ask for dignity after starving me of desire and calling it peace. He did not deny it. That mattered. For once, my quiet husband had no clean answer. Then I crossed the line because I wanted him to feel the shape of what he had lost. I told him Dante was coming home with me, not later, not after some polite separation, but now. I told him I wanted him to see replacement in person because maybe that was the only language he would understand. Caleb answered that he would handle everything properly. Properly. Again. I could almost see him typing it with that blank face, sitting among his boxes, folding another towel like a man preparing for rain. I showed Dante the message and laughed, but Dante did not laugh right away. He asked if Caleb always used that word. I said yes, because Caleb thought life was a form to complete. Dante looked toward the hotel window, where planes cut white lines across the afternoon sky, and said nothing. I did not like that silence, so I filled it. I told him Sunday would fix everything. I said once Caleb was gone and the apartment was ours for even one night, he would understand why I had to be cruel to be free. Later, I messaged Mara again, asking if she saw the post and whether she thought the caption was too soft. The message stayed unread, one grey check of absence. That was all. I put the phone down and packed my suitcase myself. Badly, not folded, not neat, because I was tired of everything in my life having Caleb's hands on it. By evening, Dante had changed his flight to mine. By morning, we were at the airport together. My red suitcase rolled behind him, his hand on the handle like the photo had promised. In the taxi from the airport, I texted Caleb that we were 20 minutes away and that I hoped he had used his time well. The message delivered. No answer came. I smiled at Dante and told him that by tonight, the apartment would finally feel alive. The taxi stopped in front of our building just as the sky turned the colour of wet concrete. Dante stepped out first, still holding the handle of my red suitcase, and I let him, because that was the picture I wanted Caleb to see. To be fair, I expected some damage. Maybe a half-empty apartment. Maybe Caleb sitting in the dark, trying to make me feel guilty with his quiet little sadness. What I did not expect was the hallway. My hallway. It was lined with bags. Not his bags. Mine. Black garment bags hung from the railing. Clear storage bins sat against the wall with white labels on them. Shoes, books, makeup cases, winter coats, framed certificates wrapped in towels. The old sailing gear from my father's boat sat in 2 blue tubs near the elevator. And in the middle of it all stood my red suitcase, upright, clean, and closed. On top of it was my silk scarf, folded into a perfect square. Caleb was standing in the open apartment doorway. Grey shirt, tired face, no raised voice, no shaking hands. He looked at the scarf, then at me, and smiled. Not big. Not cruel, just calm. That was when the folding stopped looking like weakness. He had not been smoothing small things because he was afraid of big ones. He had been separating what belonged where. I tried to step past him, but Mrs. Alvarez came out from the lobby desk with a clipboard pressed to her chest. She said I could not move anything back into the unit without Caleb's approval because the apartment was under his sole occupancy paperwork. I laughed once too loudly and said this was my home. She did not laugh. She said Caleb was the leaseholder of record. Leaseholder. There was that word again, now standing in front of me like a locked door. Caleb did not explain much. He did not have to. He said I had confirmed in writing that he had 48 hours. I had confirmed I was bringing Dante. I had told him to leave before Sunday. I had posted enough for people to understand I was choosing someone else. He said he handled the apartment and the contents properly. The dates, the messages, the boxes behind him on the video call, the way he wrote things down, the way Mrs. Alvarez answered him first, the way my father kept asking whose name was on everything. 1 clue, 2 clues, 5 clues. All of them had been sitting in front of me while I called him small. Dante looked at the bags, then at me, and asked if I had really told Caleb to leave his own leased apartment so he could move in. I said Caleb was twisting it. Dante took his hand off my suitcase handle. That was the first thing he removed from me. Tessa arrived 10 minutes later because my father had sent her, and she looked at the hallway before she looked at my face. She asked where I had planned for Caleb to sleep. I had no clean answer. Mara still had not replied. Her name sat at the top of my phone like an empty chair. Caleb gave me one thin legal sentence. His separation petition and housing affidavit were filed, and the next step would come through the proper channel. Then he stepped back into the apartment and closed the door. Housing. I slept that night in my parents' guest room under my old graduation photo. Finances. The joint card I used for travel upgrades stopped working before the hotel charge cleared. Social circle. The women who watched the video call stopped liking my posts and started asking Tessa if Caleb was all right. Dante. He left 2 days later saying he could not begin a life inside someone else's mess. Work. The Denver trip became less about the contract and more about my judgment. To be fair, Caleb did make me lonely. That part was true. But I had mistaken the man who held my life together for the man blocking the door. My red suitcase sat at the foot of the guest bed, bright and easy to spot. I gave my husband 48 hours to leave, and he used every minute to show me I had never owned the door.